believes that they will not be signed. I love it. Hello and welcome to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. When it comes to mass migration and the current refugee crisis hitting the EU, it is getting harder and harder to remain an idealist. The reality is Europe must not only manage its external borders, but also internal ones. There are, of course, economic issues to deal with, but what about the importance of culture? To CrossTalk, the refugee crisis, I'm joined by my guest, Marcus Papadopoulos in London. He's the editor of Politics First magazine. Also in London, we have Matthew Goodwin. He's an expert in European politics from the University of Kent and Chatham House. And in Berlin, we cross to Alan Posner. He is an author and commentator for the newspaper Die Welt. All right, gentlemen, CrossTalk rules. In fact, that means you can jump in anytime you want, and I very much encourage it. Marcus, if I can go to you first in London, quite a few things in play right now. We read that 80,000 asylum seekers are being thrown out of Sweden. The U.S. is considering sending boots and bombs back to Libya after its quote-unquote wonderful success there. And then we have German ministers talking about paying refugees from Syria, for example, that maybe could be in Jordan, paying them to stay there, giving them a job so they don't go to Europe. I mean, what is this? Push, pull, push, pull? I don't see any coherent script whatsoever to deal with something that is a very serious issue for Europe, and that's uncontrolled mass migration. And it's only going to get worse considering the way things are going right now. Go ahead, Marcus in London.
One thing is for sure, is that the EU's handling of the refugee crisis has been an absolute catastrophic disaster. A catastrophic disaster for the security of Europe and also for the values and culture of Europe. If I can pick up on the latter point, New Year's Eve in Cologne, over 150 women were sexually assaulted, and the police stood by and did nothing out of political correctness. The mayor of Cologne, a few days later, she made a dreadful comment about women dressing in an appropriate way to fend off possible attackers. And I didn't hear any feminist groups in Europe condemn what happened in Cologne on New Year's Eve. And then if I can pick up on the security point of view, you know, so many of us have been saying this for years and years and years, that the day the West meddled in Libya and in Syria and in Iraq, these sort of things were going to happen. And, you know, for anyone who argues that the migration crisis is not because of Western intervention in Libya and Syria and in Iraq, well, I would pose this question to them. Prior to the intervention in Iraq, how many refugees were leaving Iraq? Prior to the intervention in Libya, how many refugees were leaving Libya? Prior to the intervention in Syria, how many refugees were leaving Syria? And that is the crux of the refugee crisis, which is engulfing Europe at the moment. But do you know something, Peter? There's not going to be a remedy for this. Why? Because, for example, in Britain, British mainstream journalists, British politicians, they are not identifying the root of this, or the root cause of this. And the root cause, of course, is Western intervention. It's no different to someone who has been diagnosed with an illness because of their lifestyle, and that lifestyle is not being addressed. Well, how's that person ever going to get better if the root cause of this illness that the person has is their lifestyle? And it is exactly the same for Europe, and these problems will keep on coming and coming and coming in the future, because the West simply will not recognise that it is the root cause for the security threat in Europe and also in the wider world. All right, look, today.
Alan, you wanted to jump in there. You were reacting to what Marcus is saying there. Please go ahead. That's the point of the program. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is so stupid that I don't even know where to begin. I mean, why aren't all these refugees going to Russia then? They're not coming to Europe because we intervened in their societies and broke something that was so terribly, incredibly good. They're coming to Europe because Europe is an incredibly attractive model for living everywhere in the world.
Let me correct you there. They're not coming to Russia because Russia controls its borders. Russia controls its borders. That's a simple answer to your... That's a ridiculous comment to make. on top of it, Russia already took over 1 million refugees from Ukraine, okay? And they haven't been crying about it, all right? So Russia
can created 2 million refugees from Ukraine.
Okay, all right. Here we go.
So you create every time I try to say something.
In February 22nd had an agreement with the Yanukovych government for political transition. Then on the next day there was an armed coup that overthrew a democratically elected president, and the European Union did what? Nothing. Cowardice.
You don't control
on the part of the European Union, and you see the same kind of cowardice dealing with the refugee crisis in Europe.
Okay, well, just go on.
You want to shout at me? I can shout equally back at you. All right, Matthew, you want to weigh in? Let's go to our third guest. Out of respect, go ahead.
You invited me on the program. You want me to talk. You let me talk, right?
Don't talk
you
rubbish.
Invited me
Let's
on
go
the
to Matthew first.
You didn't say anything.
Let's go to Matthew first. No, everything you said was wrong. Let's go to Matthew to see what he has to say.
You invited me on because I talk rubbish.
Let's see what Matthew has to say.
Is this free media?
And stop hogging time.
This is what Russian free media is like.
Don't be disrespectful to everyone.
I think everyone in Russia needs to see what free media is like.
Or just leave if you can't be courteous to other people. Go ahead, Matthew.
I'm courteous to anyone.
Okay, well,
go ahead.
Well, thanks for giving me the floor. I mean, I think the refugee challenge is a massive one for Europe, and I do certainly think that Europe's leaders have underestimated the scale of the challenge. And I think I would agree with some of the comments from Marcus there that they've misdiagnosed the what you might call the push factors, what's pushing people to leave their home states. And the issue here, I think, that worries most people is actually a failure by European elites to grasp and also understand public opinion on this issue. So Angela Merkel, with the famous "We can do this" speech, essentially assumed leadership of this issue. But if you look at the views of ordinary people in Europe, they are quite different from those stances that have been taken by the EU elite. And Merkel now, I think, is understanding that. In Sweden, we've seen quite a prominent backlash. The centre-left has collapsed in Sweden. Voters are moving over to the Sweden Democrats. In the UK, voters have been very firmly against the idea of accepting more refugees. And in France and Austria, we've seen very high levels of support for political parties that are completely opposed to any further immigration, not just refugees. So, seen through the prism of public opinion, I think there's a very clear trend in Europe that is not really being adequately acknowledged by leaders.
Yeah, but Marcus, at the same time, you still have different capitals in Europe continuing want to intervention in Middle East countries. I mean, I mentioned Libya there. I mean, as we speak right now, the Pentagon is working on a plan to re-intervene into Libya after everything that has been done. We didn't have a massive refugee crisis in Libya before the forced regime change there, and now they want to try it again. They say, quote unquote, they're looking for reliable partners. I mean, how do you look for reliable partners in a failed state? Go ahead, Marcus.
Can I just say one quick thing,
sure.
Peter? It only took a few minutes for anti-Russian hysteria to emerge in this programme. So congratulations to Alan in Berlin for that. But you know, this is the problem. You know, ever since the end.
Let me say something, or are you not?
Ever since the end of the Cold War and the collapse of the Soviet Union, you know, the West has brought so much carnage to the world because they saw an opportunity in the 1990s to dominate the world politically, economically and militarily. And they took advantage of Russia being on its knees during the 1990s. They wrecked Yugoslavia. They brought jihadists into Bosnia to fight the Bosnian Serbs. They went into Iraq, and by going into Iraq, they in effect gave birth to ISIS. And then in Libya, whatever people thought of Muammar Gaddafi and his policies, he was the leader of an independent sovereign country, and he kept Islamist terrorists out of Libya. And now they've gone into Syria, and Syria is the most progressive Arab country in the world. It is modern, it is secular, it is multicultural, and it is virtually destroyed that. Though, of course, I'm very hopeful that Syria is going to recover through Russian military assistance. But as I said earlier on in the programme, the problem is that the West continues to behave in this malignant way, and then it blames others in the world for the crises that it actually causes. For example, the Ukraine crisis has been blamed on Russia. The situation in Syria is being blamed on Russia. No, it is the West. It is the West acting under this pretext of humanitarian intervention, which is giving rise to the refugee crisis, which is giving rise to Islamic extremism and Islamic terrorism, and there's no end in the future because it's going on.
Let me address that to Alan. Alan, what is the sense of causation here? I mean, Western interventions have nothing to do with this refugee and migration crisis in Europe. They're not connected in your mind, correct?
No, absolutely. If anything, the problem is not that we intervened, but that we left too soon. Firstly, talking about Libya, we're basically having no refugees from Libya at the moment. Then talk about where the refugees are coming from. They're coming, for instance, from Pakistan, where there's no Western intervention. They're coming from Iraq since the West has left Iraq, which was admittedly a terrible mistake. They're coming from Afghanistan after the West has said that they're leaving our friends in the lurch, leaving Afghanistan. Are you going to let me talk the way you let? Are you going to let me talk the way you left?
I asked the question.
Are you going to let me talk?
Do you think it was a mistake?
Are you going to let me talk?
Do you think it was a good idea to invade Iraq in the first place? Do you think that was a good idea?
It was a very good idea to invade Iraq in the first place. It was necessary.
Based on what criteria?
It was necessary to deal with a dictator who gassed his own people.
And where did he get the gas from?
Who gave him the chemical weapons to gas
the United States?
Why can't I state my views? Why? I thought I was invited on this program to state my views. If you don't want to hear my views, if you just scream at me, you're not going to hear them. Is this what free media? Is this what free media is about?
We can go to the State Department and get the same talking points. You're not adding any value to this conversation whatsoever. No value at all.
You're absolutely,
okay, the United States illegally invaded a country. You can't even respect international law.
Because
that's amazing. Only the West doesn't respect international law.
It's rich for a country which invaded the Ukraine. Which invaded Ukraine and
Russia invade Ukraine? When did that happen?
That's really rich.
When did that happen, Alan? When? Give me a date. When did that happen?
2 years ago.
When? 2 years ago. What day?
When you invaded Crimea, you don't even remember that? That's so long ago.
No. There were already 25,000 troops there legally under international law. You don't even know what you're talking about, Alan.
That is
true.
All.
You don't know what you're talking about.
Alan, I think you should go to the Crimea and say that Russia invaded the Crimea.
This is free. This is
all right, I have to jump in here. Gentlemen, we have a long way to go still. We're going to go to a short break. And after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on the refugee crisis in Europe. Welcome back to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're discussing Europe's refugee and migrant crisis. Okay, Matthew, I'd like to go back to you in London. One of the, at least for the EU, I think one of the things they think is one of the great accomplishments of the European experiment is that not to have any kind of internal borders and actually loose external borders here. Do you think that this is, for a lot of people now, this is a crisis of sovereignty? The countries don't have control of who can walk in and out of them. And okay, Germany wants, at least it's on the record, wanting a lot of refugees, but most countries, particularly in Eastern Europe, feel very overwhelmed by having a lot of refugees from the Middle East. There are countries like Poland that will cite cultural reasons. They don't want to have a lot of Muslims among themselves because they call themselves a Catholic country, for example. And then you have other countries like Greece that is completely defenseless right now. It has to deal with so many problems, and now with hundreds of thousands of people possibly walking through, that cannot be a good way for a country to exist. I mean, is this one of the things Europe is going to really seriously re-examine? Because it's when you see hordes of people walking through your streets, it can be quite frightful. Go ahead.
Well, here's my concern, Peter. What's the plan? What's the long-term plan for dealing with this? I was at an event just a week ago where it was estimated that another 1.1 million refugees will be arriving or heading to Germany in 2016, on top of the 1.1 million refugees in 2015. And less than 10% of those refugees so far have actually been integrated into any aspect of the labour market. Okay, so what's the long-term plan? And then when you look at European states and you contrast, for example, Hungary, with the UK, with Germany, or with Sweden, they are very different views as to how this crisis should be dealt. In the UK, David Cameron's been very restrictive. Arguably, he's actually understood where public opinion is. He said 20,000 refugees over 5 years, and this week has accepted some unaccompanied children from Syria, from the camps in Syria. But other states, notably Germany and in earlier times Sweden, basically took a far more liberal approach, saying anybody and everybody can come in, which was at odds with where I think public opinion was and what the actual people wanted. And that's a real problem for Europe here, Peter, because many voters really feel that things like national identity, values, national culture are incredibly important to them, that it isn't just about jobs and resources. And the real issue here is that I think European leaders are failing to acknowledge the power of that national identity. And that's a real challenge for Europe, because too often the EU has seemed disconnected from grassroots opinion.
Yeah, Marcus, again, it's this kind of democracy deficit. You know, only Brussels knows better, or actually Berlin is an extension. They know what's best for the entire European Union. I mean, Angela Merkel's behavior in all of this is just quite remarkable. It's galling how she could ask for so many people to, traipse their way all the way to Germany. What do you think they were all going to fly there? Oh, my goodness here. I mean, this is completely irresponsible, and it's certainly damaging to the entire European experiment. I mean, again, I've always criticized it for taking away so much sovereignty from these countries. You can't control your borders. This is what you get.
Well, the European Union projects itself to the world as a beacon of democracy. However, when it comes to matters such as immigration and the refugee crisis, the views of ordinary people across the European Union are being either sidelined or they're being denigrated as being the views of racist people, which is absolute nonsense. And quite frankly, it's very, very disrespectful. You know, many people, for example, in Britain, they are concerned about the refugee crisis, not because they're racist, far from it. They feel threatened from an economic perspective, a cultural perspective, and also from a security perspective. And recently, Interpol announced its findings of an investigation, and Interpol clearly stated that thousands upon thousands of refugees are actually not refugees, but they are actually potential terrorists. So when people in Britain, for example, express concerns over the refugee crisis, they should not be denigrated as racist or sidelined. There is nothing wrong with people who are genuinely concerned about their culture and about their economic prosperity and about their security. You know, of course, some people are going to be racist. They're going to be neo-Nazis, and quite frankly, these people should just be ignored. But the vast majority of people in Britain, they are concerned for legitimate reasons, and if the EU wants to maintain this idea it has that it's a beacon of democracy in the world, well, it should start listening to the concerns of the ordinary man and woman across the whole Union.
Alan, how do you square Germany's position with this issue with the other countries of the European Union? Because it's very much at odds with your neighbors.
I'd like to say one thing about the Schengen zone, no passports. You used to enjoy, when the Soviet Union existed, traveling from, shall we say, Riga in the north to Yerevan in the south in Armenia without having to show a passport. And we enjoy traveling from Riga in the north to Naples in the south without showing our passport. And we're not going to give up on that just because we have a refugee crisis at the moment. We may have to, for a time, reintroduce border controls, but we want to get back to where we were. And I think many people in Russia think back with nostalgia to that time when they could travel as freely.
I don't think so.
The Soviet Union was a country.
And the second thing is,
Alan, the Soviet Union was a country. The European Union is not a country.
It's the European Union that's becoming the Soviet Union. That's what's happening here.
May I continue?
Alan, that's illogical. Alan, what you've said is illogical.
Will you allow me? You were asking me about
Alan, what you've said is illogical. The Soviet Union was a country. The European Union is not a country.
And I'd like to go on with that. If you would let me talk.
No
one is forcing, for instance, Poland to take more refugees. Germany took 1 million refugees, and most of, well, actually, I'd say 500,000 of those refugees, one half were not, and they're going to be sent back sooner or later. Poland hasn't been forced to take any, nor has Hungary, nor has Slovakia, nor has the Czech Republic. Nor has Great Britain. Nobody can force a sovereign country within the European Union to take more refugees than they want. And this is not happening. Of course, we have to respect... Sorry?
Are they going to keep going there? Wave after wave after wave you're going to accept in Germany?
No, I don't think that cannot happen. It's obvious that Germany's capacity for absorbing migrants is limited, just as is the capacity of every other European country. Now, whether you set that limit at, shall we say, 200,000 a year, as the Bavarians are suggesting, or 500,000 a year, as I think Merkel's plan is, or whether you say it's 20,000, as Mr. Cameron does, or whether you say the Poles, they don't want to take anyone, that is a question for every country to sort out for itself, and it will be and must be sorted out. And we are, at the moment, engaged in large programs of deportation of people back to countries, including, by the way, Afghanistan, where they came from, because they do not have a legitimate refugee status. It's simply irresponsible to claim that Germany is letting everyone in who wants to come. That's not the case.
Okay.
Sorry?
So what's your evidence?
It's just not the case. I mean, it has been claiming
has nothing to do with this. That's the position coming out of Berlin here. Let me go to Marcus here. I think, Marcus, I'd like to react to something that Alan said right now. Today in Russia, and I've lived here for 18 years, they do like having sovereign borders of the Russian Federation. They don't want people from the former Soviet republics traipsing into Russia. They want to have passport control, and they want to make sure they know where people are. Why? For security reasons, to control your sovereignty. And all of these countries are doing exactly the same thing. Now, believe me, having everybody walking from Kazakhstan into Moscow is not going to happen, because it's against the immigration rules and laws here. Alan, you're living in an illusory world, okay? You have no idea what it means living in Russia.
Well, let me say something. Let me say something about security, if I may. May I say something about security? The fact is that having a passport control of the border has nothing to do with security or not security. We all know, and you know very well in Russia, that the big criminals, the people who control the mafia and so on, they don't only have one passport, they have two passports, they have three passports. The people who killed Mr. Litvinenko in the EU country, Great Britain, Matthew and Marcus, they had passports, Russian passports, by the way. And the people who come in illegally, they don't have any passports. So whether you have a passport control or not, you're not going to get them. I mean, so the fact is that this whole idea about we need borders for security reasons is just a lie. It's not true.
So Alan, let me sum it up here. There's no immigration problem. There's no security problem. Everything's just hunky-dory, right, Alan? I mean, I don't know what world you live in.
I didn't say everything was hunky-dory. I didn't say.
Go ahead,
we are cooperating strongly with our French, British and other counterparts to control people, because there is a security aspect to this.
Yeah.
Of course there is. We know very well.
In Paris,
and
right,
where do you
Alan?
get this?
That's what happened in Paris. You control everything.
These were not.
Okay, Matthew, you want to jump in there?
Yeah. So what happened in
Alan? Go ahead.
I had a simple
question. Matthew, go to
I seem to remember very differently.
Alan, I have a simple question, though. How can Germany actually stop... This is Matthew. How can Germany actually stop the inflows without giving up on Schengen? How does Germany resolve this issue in a Europe with Schengen? I can't see how those two are compatible. Borders are already going up. Inflows will continue to arrive. How does the Schengen agreement survive? You tell me. What's the answer?
Yeah, the first
I'm asking you, what's the answer to that?
Protect its border. The answer to that is Greece has to protect its border to Turkey. Greece has one of the biggest navies in the whole European Union, and it's doing zilch to protect its borders against Turkey. Now, I understand why the Greeks are doing that, because they were mistreated by Germany, by Angela Merkel during the economic crisis, and they're getting their own back. But they have to pull their act together.
Oh, you're blaming Greece now for it.
Bulgaria has put up fence. Sorry?
Alan, you live in cloud cuckoo land. You really live in cloud cuckoo land.
The second thing is...
This is what I meant. There's no plan.
Have some respect for Matthew, all right? Go ahead, Matthew. Go ahead, Matthew.
This is to do more against
Peter, this is what I was saying earlier on. There's no long-term plan. There is no long-term plan in Europe for resolving this, because too many states think too differently about this issue. They've all got grievances. They're thinking very differently. It's very difficult for the EU.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. This is a real problem.
You're openly saying, Alan, that Merkel should never have stood up and said,
Merkel should never have
stood
said
up and taken the position that she said.
All right, gentlemen, this was a very lively edition of the program. Many thanks to my guests in London and in Berlin, and thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time, and remember, CrossTalk rules. I love you.